evening, all. Our next topic is universal basic income, and I would like to invite Mr. Sriram Iyer, the editor-in-chief of Business Insider. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Gaurav, for this opportunity. Thank you, TiE Hyderabad, for inviting me here for this very exciting chat on a topic that has been a matter of debate for over 300 years and is still hot. And possibly the question whether there should be universal basic income, is it a special purpose vehicle that can eradicate poverty? Andrew Yang called it the freedom dividend, basically a certain amount of money that the state would pay each one of its citizens. Is it the only way? But it's definitely one topic on which the debate is not divided between the so-called left and the right. So that's a pleasure. So that's a relief, rather. So some of the most popular men and women in history, from Thomas Paine in the 18th century, one of the founding fathers of America, to Elon Musk today, from free market theologians like Milton Friedman and Friedrich Hayek, to leftist icons today like Bernie Sanders and the former Greek finance minister Yanis Varoufakis, everyone agrees that there should be some sort of money that should be given to everyone, because at every stage the inequality went from bad to worse, and every time it happened, this debate was revived. Thankfully for us, there are many experiments in the recent past that has given us some insights into whether it works or not. In India, we've had a limited experience with the income transfer scheme for farmers since 2019, which gives them 6,000 bucks a year. We also have we had another one in Madhya Pradesh exactly a decade ago, and with some results that many people called it encouraging in favor of UBI. But of course, the standard concerns of where is the money going to come from? Is it going to be efficient enough? And the results are not clear on that at best. So let's ask our panelists whether we should have a UBI or why not, if for that matter. So join me in welcoming Mr. J. Chaudhary, current chairman of the Indian Blockchain Standards Committee, and he's been a former IT advisor and special chief secretary to the chief minister, government of Andhra Pradesh. Mr. Rahul Nainwal, a serial social entrepreneur for a couple of decades now, TED fellow. Also, he's involved with the Amsterdam School of Creative Leadership, IRMA and THNK. I don't know how to pronounce them, so I'm going with the, spelling it out. So his expertise lies in entrepreneurship and design thinking. Mr. John Paul, he leads the Nudge Center for Rural Development, part of the Nudge Foundation. He's an MBA from ISB and a bachelor's in pharmacy from BITS Pilani. He's worked with Amnesty International in the past and Frost & Sullivan. Mr. Rai Janagam, he's coached 65 startups since 2013 and is also the CEO of the Atal Incubation Center at IIIT Hyderabad Foundation. And he supports early stage social enterprises to make them tech savvy and to achieve sustainable development goals. So let's start the discussion. First up, we know that Raj, because we had a chat earlier, I think you have a very clear stated position in favor of UBI. So let's get that out of the way. There have been several experiments in the last 5 odd years. Experiments in many countries with mixed results. In South Korea, it seems to be working well, especially during the pandemic. In Canada, they cancelled the program saying, people are not inspired enough to look for work. Kenya has had a large experiment. The results are not very clear there. In Finland, it showed some improvement, very bare minimum improvement in employment scenario. So many in Netherlands and Belgium, they found it inefficient. What are your thoughts based on your experiences?
Thank you very much, Sriram, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to go first as well. So I would put simple points to start with, because there's some good time to go into this debate. But more fundamentally, I would draw it from the point that we as a society have evolved so much, where we understand the need to take care of each other more like human beings, and the fundamental understanding that unfortunately not everybody is born equal, but then everybody can strive to make each other at equal pace. And what happens is, in a welfare state, especially, we have all the more duty to support those who are the weakest. So when we talk about universal basic income, it's exceptionally looking at from acute poverty point of view, from people who are not able to make it to a basic standard of living. It says that is those become the most important beneficiaries of itself. So I will just in this opening statement list down few immediate and important reasons why we should have. Of course, to start with reducing poverty, which is one of the topmost United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And now we have not just poverty in an abstract sense, we actually have the right numbers, we have the right stats and data on how people, like how Abhijit Banerjee puts in, how people in poverty behave to the wider global citizens. Now, understanding of poverty itself has evolved, and hence, universal basic income makes more sense to put into this evolved understanding of poverty. There is a lot of unpaid labor. Half of us are.
Let me come to you. I know you are. You told me that you are. You're not in favor of UBI because you've played an integral role in policy making and implementation as a bureaucrat. So you have a sort of real real life experience of what the challenges are. But the question remains that in principle, and I think as Raj pointed out briefly in his first answer, there is inequality staring at us and getting worse every day. There is an increasing threat of automation taking away some of the jobs, and while the idea of upskilling people is a noble one, and the practicality of bringing up to speed a large segment of population, where even today the basic education and the basic level of competence, being transferred to them in form of skills or formal training, is lacking. In such a scenario, it just seems like most people say that the question is not whether or not UBI will come. It's a question of when. Would you subscribe to that despite all the challenges?
Thank you, Sriram. Basically, Sriram, what's happening in the country today, both Government of India as well as various state governments, they've already given out a lot of incentives, particularly for the BPL families, the farmers, and it has become kind of a vote bank politics, whether this particular thing is required or not. I mean, just because it's going to be in favor of them in the upcoming elections. So without looking at whether they have enough money, are they generating additional revenue to take care of that? And just like that, I mean, this is our taxpayers' money of all of us. This money, just because they want to come back to the power in the next elections, whether it's required or not, without doing the studies, they're doling out that those funds. And the actual issue is the government is supposed to take care of the defense. Government is supposed to take care of the core infrastructure, the health, education. All these things is a fundamental thing for any citizen. So we don't. Slowly, we are getting to a stage where government may not be able to give even salaries to the employees. So where is the question of money allocated for the big projects? See, when the big projects are not coming, employment will not be there. And also many companies who are looking for government projects, they will be deprived of, they will all become sick. It's a cyclical kind of a thing. In fact, I allude to the Chinese proverb, don't give them a fish, teach them how to catch a fish. So yesterday, Manoj was talking of Nandi Foundation and Araku Coffee CEO. His model is the right suitable model for India. See how he has made all the Araku tribal people. Some of them he was telling even they were Naxalites and all that this thing. He was able to convince them and become the Araku coffee entrepreneurs. They are not giving just easy money to them, and they all feel that yes, we are becoming entrepreneurs and they are becoming richer and richer. There is a sense of this thing. Against that, last 2 years I've been living in my village. I come from Anantapur in Andhra Pradesh. And I have seen, I myself, I'm doing agriculture. And whenever we do any agriculture this thing, hardly we get any labor. We have to import the labor from other states like Bihar and West Bengal and Orissa and all that. And there also they come and go. There's no guarantee that I'll be able to take care of my crop. That's not only my problem. Every farmer, in fact, many farmers, though they have a lot of land and also they have water, they don't want to do any cultivation because labor is a big problem. And it is not economically viable paying high cost to few people. So, and in addition to that, Sriram, what I noticed, for example, there is a fee reimbursement for all the college students and all that. Whenever I used to interact with engineering colleges and other colleges, and the principal and other people are telling, sir, these our students are not really interested because they say that you are not paying my fee. My father is not paying my fee. Government is paying this thing. Why should I study? This kind of and slowly the deterioration of the quality of education is happening. Wherever you are giving something free, they are becoming lazy. They are not going to the farm. They are happily enjoying the whatever the entertainment this thing. So they are getting into that kind of a mode. On the contrary, we don't have the budgets to support on an ongoing basis. How long we are going to support it? As it is, we are facing the problem. So my solution is whatever I think Araku coffee they have done in a very, very systematically in the last 22 years, make them as entrepreneurs. What is the mechanism? Yes, definitely there is a need. Their support is required. We don't have social security kind of a platform is not there. But in India, with our kind of a democratic system, we have to come out with a unique solution rather than just copying a universal basic income just because it's working in some countries. It will work. I think implementation is a big issue. Even for example, NREGA scheme, I practically seen how people will come just for half an hour and they collect money and I don't know who are all collecting the money, they will disappear. And all taxpayers' money is going into various hands and all that. It's supposed to create some guaranteed rural employment, and for that they are supposed to work. They hardly do any work, they get money, all money is getting wasted. So like that, the implementation is going to be a big complex problem, and I'm not sure, I'm not in favor of this. Instead, we have to create a innovative way. Because we are speaking on the TIE platform, how do we make everybody a micro entrepreneur, every farmer an entrepreneur, every farm worker is an entrepreneur. So create those opportunities rather than just give the money, dole out the money, taxpayers' money, and they do nothing, and we don't have money to take care of the basic infrastructure. That's my point of view.
So I know Rahul and John, you're waiting for this, but I want to make a counterpoint, to Mr. Chaudhary. So the experiment in Madhya Pradesh, for example, in 2011 and 12, showed that a lot of the result was that it improved sanitization, education outcomes were basically people turning up to school because they had the bandwidth, welfare expenses on other counts, wellness, malnourishment, etc., etc. All of those things, those expenses went down, the burden on the state went down. So the argument there from the researchers was that if you take it large scale, the cost may not be as high as you envisage. I think even in Andrew Yang, who was challenging Trump, or the Democratic candidate in the primaries, his plan also had a similar, showed that even in the US, you can cut back welfare expenses. The same argument went back to Milton Friedman when he proposed the negative income tax. He also said that take away all the other welfare expenses. I can understand that in a country like India, you can't do away with every welfare expense. Because access is also a problem, and some welfare expenses are part of people's lives, right? I mean, like you said, if you take it away from them, they're going to revolt, even before there is a UBI. So that said, I mean, there are some positive outcomes. So you have a healthier population, maybe a more educated population, and to take your point about making a micro entrepreneur out of every farmer, maybe a big segment of this population with that extra money in hand will improve their risk-taking ability, because right now they don't have that, right? I mean, if I have a crop, one crop's loss, I'm destroyed for my, generations of work is destroyed. And this is for landless laborers, etc. People who want to go beyond what they are right now. How would you, counter my counter?
See, for those things, Sriram, you can always come with some kind of insurance instead of giving them the money. you provide enough insurance backup to those farmers because of some various situation. He is not able to make the money you supposed to this thing. So if you can create, suppose already farmer producers organizations, associations are there. For them, you provide cold storage and end-to-end marketing, and also guide them which crop when. Today they're simply copying just because other farmer is doing in the next village. I mean, without even checking whether there is going to be a market, whether he is going to produce that, whether water is sufficient or not. I mean, they're totally a copycat kind of. Instead of that, if you can provide the same money and in each village create a kind of a central infrastructure. So because these people cannot do automation, saying 1 acre, 2 acre, they can't afford to even have a tractor and all that. This thing, all the centralized infrastructure you provide from that money, and give, I mean, on a need to know basis, and also try to take that produce and aggregate this thing by aggregating, say, lakhs of acres. Even fertilizers also come very cheap for him. Pesticides, whatever this thing, right? Pesticides also will come, and also he will be able to get good price instead of selling it in the same village or nearby town. Maybe there is this centralized.
Yeah.
He can actually export it to some other country, and he'll be able to get more money than today. That infrastructure is not there. Because of that, for ages together, it is happening.
So what you're talking about is a farm level reforms, agriculture reforms,
absolutely,
of different kinds.
And you use this money, Sriram. Use this money, whatever you are supposed. Instead of too many welfare measures, create a concrete plan how that village has to be in a sustainable kind of a thing, farmers and all those people. And if that happens, they replicate the same model elsewhere. Instead of simply some state have done that, and the results are good. I don't know to what extent the survey reports or all that this thing. Instead of that, my suggestion is do a proper kind of implementation in one mandal or this thing, and see whether you are making them as a micro entrepreneurs and connecting them and making them richer day by day. Then all the lazy people also, instead of taking just money, I'm actually becoming getting more money. I'm able to give good quality education to my kids and all that. That positive direction we have to move them.
Yeah. So classic argument of somebody who doesn't like a universal basic income. But let me take this to John then. John, I think it's not just a question about farmers, right? Today, universal basic income goes beyond farmers. There are so many urban poor people, slum dwellers, who go from one job to another with no social security, no assurity of income. It's also about them, right? It's also about providing them, and we know for a fact that especially with the PM Kisan subsidy, the farmers $6,000 a year. I don't know if it really, I mean, it's a small part of their annual income, but it would have given them that much needed. I don't know how many families enjoyed that liquidity, at what desperate moment they had it, right? I mean, even if it is $1,000, it would have been huge for the family. What are your, I mean, I know you are doing some work at the ground level in Jharkhand, like you mentioned. Could you tell us, where you agree with Mr. Chaudhary or disagree with him, and same goes for Raj? I think John's feed froze right at the nick of time. Rahul, I think it's inevitable that you had to come in here.
Okay.
Would you want to take that question, or should I say let's take?
No, I think I'm quite kind of, I think, willing to take this question, and I think I want to politely disagree with Mr. Chaudhary, and on a variety of fronts. So first of all, I think this whole idea that if we give 6,000 rupees a month to a poor person, they're going to become lazy, is just a figment of imagination that we have created, because we have not been poor. Poor are some of the most hardworking people in this country and across the world. So I think, secondly, I think there's a lot of talk on creating micro entrepreneurs, teach a man how to fish. But if everybody's going to learn how to fish, who's going to buy this fish? So this argument also doesn't really hold much. I think the challenge that I see is that all of us are like kind of hooked to this economy, which is linked where production is linked to distribution, right? Unless I participate, I create something, I have no right on the fruits of the production, right? But if you look at how the today's productive economy distributes wealth, even when I'm participating, the results are really, really poor. The trickle down doesn't happen. Like that is why 1% of the whole population of the world kind of consumes and hoards 99% of the wealth. So this argument that okay, people are hardworking, they will become micro entrepreneurs, become entrepreneurs, then they will have wealth and they will come out of poverty. I mean, we haven't seen it work across the world. Now, I think there are only three large examples that we can look at on when it comes to universal basic income, whether it works or not. So one you've already mentioned, the work that Seva did, and it had very, very encouraging results. Then a much bigger experiment is happening as we speak in Africa, which a charity called Give Directly is kind of leading on. It's probably world's largest universal basic income
Is this
experiment.
the one in Kenya?
Yeah, this is Kenya and Uganda, where 100,000 families are getting $1 a day, and they're very, very encouraging results from that. That shows that people don't drink this money, they don't become lazy, they basically use this money to start sometime businesses, access good education, XYZ thing. Then about 3 years back, started an organization called Cash Relief, and the idea was to replicate the work that Give Directly was doing in India. And we did a very interesting experiment in Udaipur. We gave 32 families in a small tribal village in Udaipur 96,000 rupees. Okay. And guess what? They use this money to construct their homes, to start small businesses, to buy cattle, to buy land, to buy a two-wheeler, to access markets. Only one person actually, spend this money to, buy alcohol and give party and all of that. So I think the second challenge that we have whenever we're looking at universal basic income is, we really don't trust the poor. I don't know who gives us this right that, we can, if Sriram, I have to give you 1 million rupees, okay, or whatever equivalent of 96,000 for you would be, I can trust you. And why? Because, you're nice, you're good, you look good, you're wearing a nice shirt, you're educated. So I feel like, but if I were to give 96,000 rupees to a person who is wearing shabby clothes, it's a whole issue of trust. This
is a country where, forget giving it for free. This is a country where banks won't lend them money, or even forget banks. Even the money lender won't give them money if they're not dressed properly.
Yeah. So that's and I think finally, and I think I just kind of want to stop there and then take any further kind of questions if you may have that. Long time back I went to a conference. And this is the time when we were building SHGs and microfinance institution and making people to become enterprises, make enterprises and all that. And it was very, very patronizing until one gentleman stood up and said, isn't it ironical that people who have regular jobs and regular salary coming are actually giving gyan and lecture to people how to set up SHGs and how this is really the most important thing, and this is what they should be doing. So I think the challenge with universal basic income does not lie so much in its implementation or where will we find money. If tomorrow there is war in India, the government of India is going to print money, right? So why can't we declare on a war on poverty, right? And print money and do whatever, tax people like you and me, get our money and give it to the poor. I think the challenge really lies in the way we look at poor, the way we kind of, whether we trust them or not, kind of trust them. And that's, I think, is the bigger challenge, biggest roadblock in even looking at a scheme like universal basic income. Let's say in a country like India, you don't have to give it to everybody. Give it to all the women. Give it to all the tribals.
It took us 300 years to acknowledge what philosophers said then, that creation of poverty is endemic to a market economy. So on that note, toss to Raj, who's a philosophy enthusiast, to take how we look at the poor, the point that Rahul make, right? How we look at poverty. Many people argue that universal basic income is not a requirement triggered by automation only, because it's not a quick fix and throw money at the poor and say, well, you're not going to be employed from now on, keep this and shut up and sit down. It is an acknowledgement that, the fruits of the wealth that is being created today is also a result of resources that were used in past generations, which did not particularly belong to anyone, etc. So it's kind of acknowledging that and saying that I am better off today because somebody else struggled in the past, so I'm giving it up. Are you someone who is a votary for that?
No, I would say poor are participating in the nation building. Look, again, it also there is that other theory, right? Are poor paying the income tax? They are paying taxes. Everybody in this country, everybody who's buying anything, including essential healthcare, is paying tax. But are they getting anything in return? Right? Are they getting the basic security? Are they getting these things? And what guarantees that? So I think no, the entire looking at how we look at the poor, I think again, I'll go back to where I stopped Abhijit Banerjee's book. There are enough data, there is enough things to support that how, given a chance, that poor would want to escape the poverty trap. And universal basic income is one of such chance. So what happens is the piecemeal approach of different subsidies and all don't give them enough fuel to take off from the poverty trap. Whereas universal basic income does, because people are not in the poverty trap for just one reason. 100 people in poverty trap are there for 100 different reasons, because some have spent more on education, some have spent more on healthcare, some have spent more on marriages in India. But all of this is not taken into account when we do silo-based subsidies, right? So I just have three things to say, Sriram, just to summarize them. My first point now is, let's say one of the biggest workforce in India is housewives. Tell me which government subsidy helps housewives or pay them their fair labor. Who pays labor for my mother's cooking and taking care of children? Nobody. Universal basic income can pay mothers of this country. That's one point. That's like more than half of your population. Second, the government subsidies are filled with pilferage, filled with corruption. We are talking about direct transfers into the bank accounts of people, which we now can do, right? So now, when for midday meal costs us 11,000 crores, National Rural Employment Guarantee Act costs us 73,000 crores. This is the kind of cost of subsidies. You're right. Not all subsidies need to be taken away at the same shot, and not all people need to be given universal basic income at the same time. But there are sections of the people with using the same money. We are not saying to create new money. Using the same money, you can targetedly remove the acute poverty in this country by universal basic income. And my last point on that one is, for now, at least we have the tools to do this. Earlier, we did not have. We are only celebrating that we have what crazy amount of people in the banking system for the first time in this country. We are talking about unique identity card. We know who people are. We know very precisely who are spending how much and who are the poor people. With the tech tools, we are even exploring hundreds of startups that all of us here have supported, fintech startups. There is enough technology to put the money directly in the bank of the acute poverty, below the poverty line in people, and to the extent of them coming out of the poverty trap. That's all. You can start and stop anything in this country at any point of time because you have the technology to do it, and that gives us one big
one
reason
of the Raj, your point well taken, and bringing them up just above the poverty line and let them sort of fight the battle, competitive battle after that. John, what is so? There are multiple arguments here, right? One is it makes people lazy. One is it's not unaffordable. I think one point that nobody has made so far is that it will bring inflation. That poverty line will go from 10 to 20. So even if I reach 15, I am still below the poverty line because now the prices have gone up. Are there any empirical evidence in your experience towards any of this? Do people become lazy? Does inflation shoot up? And do people really use the money well?
Yeah, I think let me first start by saying that it does not make people lazy. Let me actually go back to an experience that we've had with the poorest of the poor, and I'm talking about a specific segment that we have chosen in this country and across the world to refer to as the ultra poor. And the ultra poor have many characteristics, particularly vulnerable tribal groups fall among them, landless. So the bottom 5 to 10% of any village that are socially, financially, economically excluded. So we work with that particular category. There are 70 million of them in India. What we do is identify them, target them. So it is a targeted program versus a universal approach. The first thing that we do is actually cash support. We give them regular weekly cash support for about 3 to 6 months, depending on the household. And the reason we do that, and we call that breathing space, actually, we don't call it, BRAC in Bangladesh calls it breathing space, because the Didi is actually one of the most hardworking persons you can ever find. I can go into a list of things that she does on a daily basis that, and we can take the entire hour. She collects wood. She has to take care of her family. She has to work in the local markets, and the list goes on. And she is worried about tomorrow's food. When you give her this money in hand, this cash in hand, and say, "Didi, आप खाने के बारे में चिंता मत करो, हमारे साथ बैठो, और हम आपका जो भी livelihood है उसके बारे में सोचेंगे, उसके बारे में plan करेंगे, काम करेंगे." She comes and then she participates. So for us, this breathing space intervention is actually a way to get her to come and participate in a meaningful livelihood activity. Then again, we give her a grant to about 15,000 rupees, and for that household, it's about 50 to 60% of her annual income, for the household's annual income. There are still households in this country that live on 20 to 30,000 rupees annual household income, right? And then we plan.
There won't be much of a house to talk about.
Yeah, it isn't, right? The household's weekly income is 500 rupees, right? So we do this, and it really works, because the Didi, for her, this is a way out. She looks at this cash as something that she has the freedom to work with. We obviously handhold. So to Mr. Chaudhary's point, I don't think anyone in this room can deny that sustainable rural livelihoods in the form of entrepreneurship or any other form of opportunity is unimportant, I think, or important. It is definitely important. We need to build sustainable livelihoods, whether it is non-farm or farm or in the form of jobs, absolutely essential. But I think you can't take away the importance of something close to a universal basic income.
What about inflation, John?
I think it is to be seen. I don't think, it's not in a country like India with our own idiosyncrasies. One has to see. Too early for me to comment.
Anyone else? I don't think Mr. Chaudhary is against welfare in general. He's against giving money to for free.
Yes, Sriram, you are absolutely right. I'm not against helping the poor. Only the way it's getting implemented. See, in India, you can't universalize.
But Mr. Chaudhary, will you admit that working conditions for India's poor have and it just gets worse with every dropping layer in society, right? I mean,
absolutely.
Right?
I agree with that. But
so
how do you implement is the question.
So if the point is that if I have 500 rupees in my pocket and I don't have to take up that one job, whether it is at a farm or whether it is at cleaning somebody's house in the cities for a particular price, right? I mean, people are used to negotiating the worst with the cheapest form of labor, right? I mean, people will negotiate with an autowala but can't say anything to an Uber search price. People will negotiate with somebody who's cleaning your toilet, can't say anything to a shopkeeper, right? So that working condition and respect and dignity of labor, the lower it goes, the worse the work, the less dignity you have and the less pricing power you have. If that 500 rupees gives me the confidence to negotiate better with the employer and bring me at negotiating terms with them, isn't that better?
No, my point, Sriram, see, this universal basic income, the concept is good, but in India, we cannot implement that as it is. So we need to see, for example, as somebody was mentioning, the urban poor, the instruments have to be different. Similarly, rural farmers' instruments have to be different. Maybe we have to engage a credible NGOs where they're really passionate to implement, identify who are the people who are going to be the beneficiary. Then the money, whatever is identified for this benefit, it goes to those targeted people rather than spreading it thin. As it is, we don't have that kind of a budget. This thing, and I don't think you can stop existing incentives. The moment you stop existing incentives, they lose the vote bank, and none of the politicians are interested in stopping any of. So where is the money? So the money kitty is limited. This kitty, if you can just make it thin, then who is going to be benefited? No, none of them will be benefited with a small additional money. Instead, my point of view, Sriram, I mean, if you have to come out with a proper implementation structure, maybe identify for urban poor how some of the NGOs, credible NGOs, they have done identifying the problem and also solving them. This thing, maybe take their support. The implementation arm should be them, not the government. Then automatically we'll be able to solve with that limited money. Then definitely it's much needed. I don't deny that. I'm not telling that it's not required. It is required. But implementation, how do we do the proper implementation? So that's where I'm coming from.
So, does anyone have an insight into the inflation projections on by giving out this money, and does it increase? One of the, let's say, let's just do it as a thought experiment, right? I mean, I have, let us say, I was a homeless man. They did an experiment in the UK. I'm kind of sort of drawing from that, and then they gave, I think, £3,000 a year or whatever to that person. And many of them went, and the first thing that they did was to sort of find themselves a shelter, like rented a place or, something like that. If that were to happen in India, if you were to go target, say 100 people, homeless people in Mumbai, and give them some money that they can afford. I mean, I don't know what amount of money they can afford a home there, but let's say you give them money and then they flock to the closest slum, for example, which is already packed and bursting at its seams. What does it do to the rents there? What does it do to food prices, etc.? Does anyone have any data insights on this? I'm throwing it open.
I think so. So my sense is, I mean, if you just use the laws of demand and supply, it would seem like it will increase kind of inflation. But whatever studies I have done and the research paper that I have kind of seen, it doesn't kind of because this is not really cause and effect. It kind of, it's a mixed bag of things. So it doesn't really point out that yes, definitely it will lead to inflation. However, what it points out to is that it might actually increase in production of certain goods and services, because now a large population of people who earlier were not able to participate in the economy because they didn't have the capital to start a small business and all that, or get proper health and then get back into the economy. A lot of people are not participating because of all these reasons also. So once you give this to them, actually it will, in some sense, I mean, again, theoretically, increase your GDP.
Maybe the answer, Rahul, is, I mean, because we don't have data on the table right now, maybe the answer is that person will take that 5,000, 10,000 rupees that the government gives and go back to the hometown instead of being a homeless man in Mumbai or Delhi. Maybe that's a possibility, right? Maybe. I mean, I don't know. I don't think we should consider that as an outcome. Raj, do you want to come in on that? What Mr. Chaudhary said.
No, so on in fact, there is this whole theory about the recapitalization of assets at the grassroots. The purchasing power of the extreme poor actually increases. And very, very simple. Let's say someone's driving a motor as a means of livelihood, very poor. 100 rupees, he buys a petrol. We know 60 rupees is going to come back to the state and the nation as a taxes or whatever that levy is. So I think purchasing power at the bottom of the pyramid is a foundation for all the social enterprises in this country who are trying to work with the poor. Now, that itself is not there among a large section of society. Now, this universal basic income, we are thinking it as we are giving this money and poof, it's gone. That's not the right way to think. It's not gone. We are putting the money back in the economy in a certain person who didn't have access to it. So when you start thinking like that, the money is still rotating in the economy the same way it does in any other side. So that changes the whole perspective.
And also, I don't think we should frown upon the leakage. I mean, there will always be that one person who goes and buys, ganja or something, and on the streets gets drunk on alcohol or whatever. As long as it's sort of a majority or a big chunk of the population uses it wisely, and I think they will. If the idea is, if we are giving it to those people who are, finding it difficult to buy the basic dal, rice, sabzi, and and everything, and you get it back in terms of GST, in terms of a better labor force, more stronger labor force. Yeah. Raj.
There is this one citation. I remember one thing reading about Swami Vivekananda actually, and he was a very big fan of giving money to beggars or homeless on the street. You know, excuse my words, but that's how they were called at that time, right? So, and then somebody asked, "Why are you doing this?" This is not the one solution all, but what he said is, "I'm at least glad out of extreme desperation they're not committing thief or crime,
Yeah.
and they're just asking for money. That's what they really, really need." And there is like that very big chunk of genuine homelessness in the country because of acute poverty. So that's one thought process where even in the back in that day, you know, looking at how we look at the poverty was there.
So on the question of where will the money come from, I think we're all getting stuck there. Where will the money come from?
Yeah, definitely we can't print Sriram, like USA, whenever they need additional money, they can print dollars. But I don't think India RBI will
But
allow us to
Mr.
print
Chaudhary,
the
that's
money
the thing, right?
whenever it's required.
We have our own, we've had our own stimulus. US has had stimulus. Europe has had stimulus. People have printed money to save Goldman Sachs executives and, you know, big banks too big to fail. Why can't we bail out some poor people is the argument that will come from the other side.
That's definitely required. But I don't think based on whatever assets we have in terms of gold reserves and all that, based on that only we are allowed to
Okay.
print.
So there is an interesting
I don't
idea-
think we can print just like that.
So there is an interesting idea on the table that has been proposed by the former Greece finance minister, who's now an active sort of political ideologue in Europe. He says, where will this money come from? He doesn't think that it should be funded by tax dollars, right? It should my tax and your tax should not go up because of that. It should come from what he says, and I think it sort of draws from what Raj also mentioned. The taxing the capital, like for example, if somebody Google makes money, Google's share value goes up when every time I search online, every time I do something, I'm adding to Google's business, especially in the era of big tech and bigger innovations based on technology. Every time I buy something online, order on Zomato or something, they make not just revenue, but they also make an addition to their share value, their capital, and then a part of that money should come here. Is an argument. How many of you would agree, disagree, agree with conditions, etc.?
Yeah, Sriram, go ahead.
We feel, yeah, anyone, please. Let's keep it very fluid. Yeah.
No, I just want to address a point, a related one. Where will the money come from? Will it lead to inflation? I think we don't have to go too far. The one Andrew Yang that you mentioned actually makes a point on this. He mentions as long as the money comes from existing money supply in the economy and rotates within the economy, you shouldn't have a problem. Well, if we print money to start a scheme, we don't know. I don't think any of us can predict. We can look at other countries and say how those countries have behaved. But that's his point. Now, I think, or he proposes that you have value-added tax, or like you are proposing, or the Greek finance minister is proposing capital gains tax. Those are politically not very popular moves, right?
It's definitely more popular than taxing if the working class. Let's say if you were to tax the working class and say pay for another section within the working class, then you are that has a more polarizing, divisive characteristic than.
Definitely, I think then I should not have said politically not very popular, not popular amongst people
The
with
influential
capital.
class, people who have to agree for this to happen.
But I think I want to make an important point, and it goes back to Mr. Chaudhary's point. Is I think I'll tell you why I'm in the middle. Is that I worry that the effort to cut down on other subsidies, which is where it might go, to fund a universal basic income, might therefore undo a lot of hard-won subsidies, hard-won schemes and acts like NREGA, for example. That's the worry, because yes, it is 73,000 crores NREGA. In fact, in India, we do have something as close to an universal basic income as possible, which is PDS, right?
Yeah.
There are issues with it, of course. when I say universal, I see it as truly universal without any conditions and clauses, which is one of its core strengths. There is, bureaucracy goes away, leakage goes away, and many other things goes away. Of course, there are benefits of cash transfers that we all know of. But if it is not universal, if it is a scheme that is going to be targeted, then we have enough of them. We have NREGA, we have pension schemes. We can just extend pension to a lot of people. The question that goes back to Mr. Chaudhary's point, which I think is a valid point, if you're not able to sufficiently fund the UBI, it might become something that is very, very small amount, which is universal. Would we rather have that, or would we have a substantial, like Pranab Bardhan says, have 10,000 rupees per household, right? Or 15,000 rupees per household. How are we going to fund that? If you're not going to fund that by printing money or by through capital gains tax, it might come at the cost of other schemes that we have really fought for in the past, right? That's my biggest worry, and I'm not sure if it at this stage it is the right pathway to go in. I just wanted to submit that one point and leave it to that. Whether inflation will happen or not, I think there's a lot. I think we just have to listen to the best minds on that. I don't have a particular point of view on that. We have to go through experiments.
So I kind of have a slightly different view on this. I think we are almost kind of saying that it seems like it's a good thing to do, this universal basic income. However, we have like a plethora of schemes and subsidies and everything, which we all know are a lot of them don't work at all, right? There's a lot of leakage. We have created an army of, bureaucrats and government machinery to deliver these services and still don't do a good job. But because we don't want to dismantle these inefficient ways of helping the poor, we should not do this. So I think that I find it kind of quite really surprising.
It does seem like in a country like India, it's only possible in a targeted way, which, like John said, Raj said.
But that's a different. So Sriram, that's a question that comes later on. So I think, right, I feel that in among the policymakers, there's still a lot of disagreement on whether this is a good thing to do.
Yeah.
Once we
most recently, Rahul, I had a chat with the chief economic advisor. I'm sorry to interrupt because you made this.
No, go ahead. Yeah.
And also to tie up to a point that John made is about universal basic income versus universal pension. And the chief economic advisor says, I would any day vote for a universal basic pension as opposed to an income. After they are 60 or whatever, when they are not in the working age, let us support them, let us give them money, let them be okay. But we should not disincentivize the search for work for among the youth. I think that was a thought. I'm throwing it out there for any reactions.
Yeah, but I think there lies the problem, because what he's really arguing is that a 6,000 rupees monthly income, let's say, for an individual is going to make them not seek for work, which I don't agree. And you and me intuitively know that doesn't happen. Otherwise, you and me will not be working, right? Why would we work? I am getting more than 6,000 rupees or equivalent to 6,000 for my lifestyle, but I'm still working 12 hours a day. It is not that. So I think, and that is what I'm saying, there is a problem. We have not intuitively de-linked production with distribution of income. Somehow the dominant paradigm is we have to produce to be able to receive. And I think unless we kind of, grapple with that and make peace with that fact, we'll always, come out with these arguments. We'll dilute the whole idea of universal basic income.
So Rahul, you're in that camp which says that you give people money, maybe they'll go sit and write poetry, paint pictures, the classic Marxist ideal. Yeah. And I'm going to quote someone who led Breitbart News, because he cited this example saying, no, they're not doing that. You give them money, they're not sitting writing poetry, they're doing something else. And, not all of them are, smoking away their extra money. But yeah, so on that note, I think we are back to a Milton Friedman argument then, which is basically, say, a negative income tax, which is if you are not making the basic livable income, the state will compensate a tax portion of that, right? I mean, if you are, let's say he gave the example of $3,000, and if your income was $2,000, then the government would give you, let's say, 20% of that 1,000 shortfall. So you still have to work for the remaining 800, but it gives you a certain cushion. Is that a model that's agreeable to all?
Yeah, Sriram, I have a point here. See, for example, there are some schemes, existing schemes. For example, farmer equipment subsidies. Actually, since I have been doing the farming job last 2 years, and whenever we want to take the subsidy and buy that equipment, actually my brother was telling, no, brother, I mean, we can get slightly better rate if you go directly and purchase it instead of taking through the government this thing. That means there's something is happening. Instead, you cut off all that flag. Then you give that money, whatever I'm intended to get, a farmer is intended to get the subsidy, that you give a direct benefit to my account instead of coming through the subsidy, and where all those things are not properly handling. And my argument is, Sriram, I think there are many schemes which are not properly implemented in the country. Money is there, already they're doing it. And the same thing, instead of adding some more into the universal basic income kitty, phase one should be, what are the existing schemes which are working, which are not working, how do we take out that money and give that money to the same farmers? They'll also be happy. See, farmer is happy that he is getting additional money. Otherwise, I mean, anyway, he is not getting any help through the subsidies. So like that, we have to go in a very systematic way. Not that just like that, there's a one new
mantra, for example, one argument there will be, like in many parts of the country, farmers are not always farmers, not through the year. And I think I'm drawing from a point that Raj made earlier about the reason for my poverty is very personal. Like he said, somebody is poor because they're paying education loans, somebody is poor because they're saving for a marriage, they're, bought a house, whatever, or maintaining an old house which they inherited. But
no, I'm just giving one example. I'm giving one example.
So let's talk about the farmers example. And there are lots of people, especially in the north of India, who are farmers during the monsoon season. Then they are drivers in the winter season. Then they are somebody else in another 3 months. And still just about getting by, right? I mean, not. Will it give them the incentive to remain farmers and or forget farming, which is not working out for them, focus on some other trade that they are good at and they would like to do? That choice as an entrepreneur, because I'm drawing from the things that you want from the economy. You want people to be self-sustained. Obviously, these are poor people, but they are definitely not lazy if they can do 3 jobs in a year. I don't think I can. We don't have the skill sets to do 3 different kinds of things. So they can, right? And if that person has an additional 50,000 rupees in their pocket and say, tides them over a lean patch in a year, why not?
Sure.
Right? Okay, you just agreed. I don't know what to do.
I agree. See, Sriram, I agreed because that kind of a homework has to be done. You cannot just like that implement a scheme without doing whatever you said. I mean, we have to identify and fix that problem and accordingly provide that money to them. Then it works. Otherwise, it will become additional vote bank politics for some political party to get into the power. Let's not waste our taxpayer money getting into that route, rather than truly we are trying to help the poorest of the poor people in urban, rural, various sectors. Then definitely a lot of homework needs to be done. All of us have to come together, all the credible NGOs who are already doing a great job in the country, we have to take them into conference, then properly initiate, and maybe we have to, with force, we have to take away some of the subsidies which are not properly working, use that money and pool that money, create the bigger kitty in that this thing, and go in a targeted way. Urban poor, what is that we need to do? Rural poor, what is that we need to do? How is that this thing? A lot of homework needs to be done. Just like that, we cannot say, whatever is working in the UBI in X country, India also we should do that. Then we'll be getting into other.
South Korea UBI is based on the fact that factory jobs are gone. I don't think we are there yet. So, so we need to figure that out. How much time do we have left?
We have 4 minutes left.
Okay. So I think we should just round it up then on this note. I think let us sort of, draw down on the things that we have inferred, we can infer from this conversation. Maybe a UBI, but in a more targeted fashion. Target obviously the poorest of the poor. I think, the empirical evidence on whether people misuse the extra money that is given to them as a state dole makes them lazy is not very strong, because the money that state will give is going to be a small portion of what it takes to survive a household, for a household to survive and thrive, and pretty much if it is a household with sort of older and younger generations, the aspiration for a better future for a younger generation is always there, and therefore and the question always comes down to where is the money going to come from. There are lots of ideas on the table across the world, but definitely I think 3 out of 4 of our panelists agree that the way to think about universal basic income, it may not be universal in India. Let's say it's for the people who need it and the most, and of course thereafter. The way to think about it is not to sort of look at the poor with a certain amount of mistrust and trust them to have a good judgment for their life and that of their children and their family. And I think on that positive note, I would like to thank TiE Hyderabad. Thank you, Gaurav. Thanks all my panelists, Rahul, Raj, John, and Mr. Chaudhary, for engaging with me today and sharing your experiences and insights on this very important topic. It's far from over. This is Sriram Iyer signing off.
Thanks, Sriram. Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed the discussion.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.